Hi guys, and welcome to another one of my little chats with Paul industry leaders. Now this is a little bit different, this one, and I'm really looking forward to this because this interview was, well, it came out of a Facebook post I did about what do you look at when you're playing a shot? Is it the cue ball or is it the object ball? Well, hopefully we've got a young guy here who's actually written a PhD paper on this very subject. 28 years old, oh, don't you just hate it? So much talent, so clever, so many brains, and he's already written a PhD. Zakery Lamb. Hi, Zach.
Hiya, how are you?
I'm good. I'm glad that I've got you here because you've been sorting out a few little computer problems for me as well, which was a little bonus. So, look,
Mm,
you replied to the post that I put on Facebook and you mentioned something called quiet eye. Now,
mm.
I'm intrigued to know more about this. So, tell us about what quiet eye is.
Okay. Um, so before I talk about quiet eye, I think there's a couple of theories that we need to understand first. Okay. That underpin the usage of quiet eye when it comes to cue sports. Firstly, so I've written my proposal today. I've got 3 to 5 studies lined up that will hopefully, fingers crossed, eventually be published in this area. All planned, all ready to kind of be sent off. When I say literally written it today, I literally finished it 20 minutes before I came onto the call with you. So it's very fresh in my mind. So it couldn't be a better time really. Um, so I'm going to explain 2 theories. The first one's called process and efficiency theory, and the second one's called attentional control theory. Okay. Process and efficiency theory. I've got my notes here. If I keep looking there, that's why. Um, Essentially is how well someone can perform a cognitive task. So if I use the word cognitive, and I'll probably use it a lot throughout the talk, it essentially means a thinking task where your brain has to process some form of information before it can make a decision or before it can solve a problem. Um, and what process and efficiency theory is a marker of really is the speed, accuracy, and duration of someone being able to make effective decisions, solve problems, perform routine behaviors such as a pool technique or a snooker technique. Attentional control theory is the ability to focus on the word we use is relevant stimuli, but the layman's term, I'm going to try and make everything as layman as I can, is that our ability to focus our attention on a specific thing, object, task without being distracted by other things. Okay. So processing efficiency is our capability, and the attentional control is like how well we can narrow in and really sustain focus and select the correct things to focus on. So the language that we use, and that is very easy language, is task relevant focus, task irrelevant focus, and task disruptive. So if, for example, you're playing a snooker shot, task relevant information might be the line of aim, the mechanics to the cueing arm and how you place the cue on the line of aim, various technical routines that you would do. Where do you place your eyes? Object ball, cue ball. That's maybe one of the things we'll talk about. Task irrelevant information would be anything that comes into your brain that is irrelevant to being able to achieve that task. So the best example of that might be if you imagine that you're looking at the table and you're stunning a ball into another object ball. What some people do is on impact, they'll look at the other ball, completely miss the ball, it rattles, and the commentator will say, oh, he's took his eye off that one. And what they actually mean is that's irrelevant information has come into the brain, overrided our processing efficiency, taken control of our attention, and we can no longer perform the task, or because we were focusing on something different, the outcome of the task has deteriorated and we've not achieved the outcome that we want. Task disruption is often what takes us from task relevant to a task irrelevant focus. So what we could call this then is imagine that you're playing a shot and someone's eating, we've all done it, well, we've all had it. Someone's eating a packet of crisp in background and you're down on your shot, you've got your QR going and all you can hear is, well, that's a disruptive stimuli that's taking you from task relevant. Your brain then processes the new information, process efficiency. You pay attention to the sound and you're no longer able to focus on the relevant stimuli. So the reason that this is really important to understand before we go into quiet eye is because these things are underpinned by something called cognitive anxiety. Now, we all know what anxiety is. Cognitive anxiety is anxiety, bless me, that directly affects our thinking. So it might be like mental worry or mental fog, or we've all had that thing. I don't know if you played back in the day, Mark, but a lot of high performers have had that thing where their brain just shuts down and they can feel, but they can't think. So cognitive anxiety is best defined as just worry. But what we see in a lot of studies and a lot of performers is when cognitive anxiety increases, processing efficiency decreases, so we're unable to process information. And as a result, where we place our attention is actually on the anxiety, not on the task relevant cues. So anxiety itself becomes this anxiety becomes this task irrelevant function, and our brain focuses on this, and it's unable to focus on the task relevant cues, what we should be focusing on. I'll explain more about the processing systems after I've answered the question, because I realize you asked a very simple question. I've gone in quite a lot of detail for it. So essentially, you said to me, why is quiet eye an important part of the shot? Well, an important part of the question when we're considering object ball or cue ball. What quiet eye is, in its simplest terms, is the final fixation before a motor movement. So this would happen with our cue arm in the action phase of a shot as you're delivering the cue. In that final phase, your eyes will fixate on an object. And what we actually know is oftentimes what it's fixating on, you're not taking anything in at that moment in time. It's like your brain blinks and turns off. But we know that where you place your eyes is massively important for two reasons. One, it mediates cognitive anxiety. And what that means is it's a way of overriding the cognitive anxiety and placing our attention and our processing on a task relevant cue, a visual cue. And we know that quiet eye has been proven. People who have a better quality quiet eye are more capable of performing well in high pressure cognitive anxiety situations. And secondly, what it does is it gives you a repeatable routine where you can always have that as the last task relevant focus to focus on. So even if the rest of the routine's gone wrong, if you do that, there's always a chance that you're going to pop the ball because your last action might just self-organize, which means it just does the movement itself, even if the setup isn't correct. Final point, quiet eye can be determined by fixation, where you place your focus, and duration, how long you place your focus there for. There tends to be an optimal time period. So it tends to be around about a second to 1.6. Anything less is not long enough. Anything more, depending on the task, can be a little bit too much. So the reason that quiet eye is so important, or can be so important, especially if it's trained, and the reason it's really important to understand whether we're looking at the cue ball or the object ball, is because of the brain's ability to pay attention, for cognitive anxiety to swallow that attention and to take up all your energy sources, all your thinking. And then processing efficiency by using quiet eye, you can retrain the brain, even in the highest pressure situations, to focus on the correct attentional cues to enable yourself to get, the highest performance. And it's ironic, really, because this is what I've just talked about is what I wanted to end the talk with, because I think there's a lot that goes into it. But it's, of course, we'll explore the other topics. There's maybe 4 or 5 different theories that we've got to understand fully before we can actually digest what I've just said in as an absolute, if that makes sense. But what I will do is the more I talk about it, the more I'll come back to this answer and re-explain it from a different perspective in a new theory.
Let me ask you another question. We often hear about players when they're training for hours and hours and hours. We often hear the term they're training for muscle memory. Now, how does muscle memory fit in with the brain? Because the brain surely has to memorize that because it's controlling the muscle. So where does that theory fit in?
Yeah, so there's a few things. So first of all, habitual theory comes into it, how we habitualize a movement. And I'll explain a model in a second, how that can help. And I bet that, this is something I talk to a lot about with clients, and it's sometimes a revolutionary thing for people to realize that this is how they learn. And the second thing is how vision and motor movement work together, because both of which, vision usually originates in the visual cortex, which is an area of the brain at the back, and it's influenced by 2 systems, the ventral and the dorsal system. One has a direct influence on emotional reactions, so that's like the amygdala and the hippocampal area, and the ventral system is more on how we interpret, organize spatial awareness that's in the environment. The second part is the basal ganglia, and what we know is that when a motor movement has been trained, the frontal cortical areas of the brain, which is here, and the basal ganglia is like down here, don't actually activate for subconscious movement. And what that tells us is we don't have to think about what we're doing. We just do. So the reason that it's really important then to habitualize and train these 2 things together, vision and motor movement. And I'd give a shout out here, a good friend of mine, Chris Emery, who's obviously massive in sport. We've had hours talking about this. I mean, hours talking about it. He has an amazing product called the Balls. In terms of neurology, science-backed neuroscience, incredible. You get augmented feedback, you get direct perception, you get to understand where you're looking, how you're looking, and combine it with a motor movement in a tight tolerance. Incredible product. We talk about this a lot, and basically what happens is when you're doing a motor movement, your vision works with the motor movement. So they come together. That's called perception action coupling. It can also be called visual motor performance. In my line of work, it tends to be called visual motor performance because we use something called the information processing model rather than an ecological approach. But that's a divergence. So basically what happens when you habitualize a behavior is there's a little fatty substance in your brain called myelin. And when you learn a new behavior, what happens is there's 2 synapses and a little electrical shock will fire between them, and then they'll kind of stick together and there'll be like a pulse firing through them. Now, the more that you fire that pulse, and you do that through repetition, usually quality repetition, this gray matter, this myelin, wraps around that substance, and what that does is it insulates the electric and speeds up the decision. So the more that that's sped up, and the more that we can do that, the less we have to think about it, which means that our brain then frees up other space to be able to focus on task-relevant information, and we develop these habits that we can fall back and rely on in our subconscious, so that when we're focusing on the information, we don't actually have to process it as it's happening because we've got lots and lots of repetition in it. So we kind of created this motor memory, visual memory, i.e. a habit that allows us to just perform. There's a really, really good book called The Talent Code that explains myelin in detail. Another one is called Peak by Anders Ericsson. He explains it in great detail as well. There's a few really good ones. There's one called the neurobiology of we, but it's very deep. It's about attachment theory. If you're not from an academic background, I probably wouldn't touch that one. I'd probably just go for the more generalized two. So just to re-answer your question, I told you a second ago there's this model for learning, and it's literally called the three stages of motor learning. The author has skipped my mind, but it will come into my mind at some point. And essentially, there's three levels of learning a skill. There's cognitive, associative, and automatic. Cognitive is when you have to think about a skill. So if I asked you to perform a random task, right now that you've never performed before, so say you had a ball in front of your hand, and I asked you to throw it up in the air and catch it with the other hand without looking, for example. Let's assume that you've never done that before, then we would have to think about that a lot. So as we throw the ball in the air, we would have to process it and we would probably imagine the ball going up in the air. Our brain would think about where the hand is, and then we'd hope that it falls into the hand, or we'd make a judgment that it does fall into the hand. Let's say we've done that 10,000 times. But now what had happened is it's become automatic. So the myelin has wrapped around the synapses, the electrical signals are fired. Our brain can find that signal in our brain can recognize that signal really quickly and doesn't even have to think about it. The basal ganglia takes over and it becomes subconscious, habitualized movement. Now you just throw the ball and you just catch it. You don't have to think about it. It's almost like you do it 1,000 out of 1,000. You don't even have to think about it. If we've done 1,000, we might be at this transfer stage that lives in the middle. So it goes from cognitive to automatic called associative. And what this means is that our brain is learning how to put less energy into the focuses, but every now and then it'll have to focus more on that topic because the synapses aren't connected quickly enough yet with the myelin. So we still have to have some conscious effort on it. And what happens with a lot of pool players, and there's a theory in this that leads to underperformance, is a lot of cue sports players will keep trying to make things cognitive, and in their head they'll say, right, I need to take control of this situation. Cognitive anxiety goes like this, and they say, okay, well, in other areas of life, if I want to take control of a situation, I'll think about it. So I've got to think about what I'm doing. But actually what that does is it restarts that repetition at stage one. So they'll change what they're focusing on. They'll say, okay, today I'm going to have a tight hand. Today my bridge is going to be close to the cue ball. Today it's going to be further away. Today it's going to, today I'm going to go off center and have my QA. Today I'm going to hold it a little bit closer. Today I'm going to bend my elbow. Today I'm not. And actually what you're doing is you're resetting your brain to not focus on what's become automatic, and you get stuck on cognitive mode. And we know, I can't remember the theory name, but there's a huge theory where people massively, massively underperform because of that. And I know if you ask the people when I grew up in the snooker club from 15 at Bolton Snooker Club, I was obsessed with technique. And every day I'd change. And I didn't make my first century till I was about 21. But my technique was amazing from about the age of 17. Like I had everything you needed to make a century. And it was just because it wasn't until I was 21 did I trust my motor mechanics and my decision making enough for it to just be automatic. And it was only then did I trust the process and just allow myself and to kind of just do rather than think. And there's an amazing book called The Inner Game of Tennis that talks about that. I don't know if you've ever heard.
I've read it.
Great.
Fabulous.
And it's about doing, not thinking, and kind of being effortless. So the idea, the original answer to your question, and I appreciate I've gone into a lot of depth and I've explained a lot of models, and I hope people enjoy that sort of thing because I'm very much academic. But essentially what we're talking about here is for us to get the quiet eye trained, going back to the quiet eye, we have to get enough repetition doing the correct thing. Now, in a lot of people, that will already be subconscious. So you'll hear people say, no, I focus on the cue ball. And you'll hear other people say, well, I focus on the object ball. Well, the way that we check people's quiet eye is we put some glasses on them. They're called Toby glasses. They're extremely high quality. And we measure their eye movements. And although we've not actually done it in a study capacity, we've done it in the lab. And we've kind of looked at cue movements and what people do. And what you find is actually people look at different things on different shots. The main thing that I find that mediates it is angle and distance. If the difficulty of the distance and the difficulty of the angle is very complex, it's a difficult shot. It requires a lot of power, a lot of angle recognition, and the white has to travel along the distance. You'll almost always find that people look at the object ball. They almost never look at the cue ball. Whereas if you're playing, let's say, snooker, you're playing a black off the cushion to screw back for the pink. Well, in this scenario, it's a shorter distance. It's a simple angle. Let's assume it's straight. We don't require that much power. You can focus on the cue ball because it's an easier process point, kind of like a golf would on a putter.
Right. Now, this is where I want to bring in what...
I'm just going to have a sip.
Please do. I'll have one as well. Cheers. I hope that's water in there.
Right. Once I start, I can't stop.
You haven't got some Pringles as well, have you?
Got hot chocolate. The doorman on reception said, Zach, I said, I'm doing a talk. He said, here, I'll bring you hot chocolate. So I've got hot chocolate
nice.
here.
That's nice of him. So, yeah, look, my whole theory, whether it's right, wrong, it's something that I truly believe in. And it is that this is nothing to do with really sighting. It's looking at the object ball for me is the thing that helps me get the cue from there to there, because that's where I'm looking, okay? And I truly believe, I liken it to a tree in the distance, a snow-covered field with a tree in the distance. If you keep your eye on that tree, you've got every chance of, well, you'll walk straight to that tree. Whereas if you're looking down at your feet, you will not walk to that tree because you will deviate. And I feel that it not only helps sighting, but it helps the cueing side of it as well, because where you're looking, where is your tip is more likely to go to. Therefore, if you're looking at the cue ball, then your cue is more likely just to go to the cue ball maybe and not get that proper follow through effect. And that I believe is something which people kind of confuse. So I was interested to know your theory on...
So there's a lot of science behind this.
Okay, good.
Doesn't have to be my personal theory. It's a data-driven theory.
Okay.
So I'm trying to think the best way to explain this. Okay, so remind me in a minute that I said visual motor workspaces, because as I go down a different avenue, I'll probably forget that I need to talk about that.
You know I'm 62, right? You know I'm 62 years old. I'm not going to remember anything. Write it down because I'm not going to remember it.
So basically what you just talked about is a single target task. And there's different types of target tasks. Snooker, pool, any cue sports is augmented target tasks. So it's different to single target. So your theory is absolutely correct in a different context, but a lot of what you consider to be correct is also correct in this context. It's just explained differently. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So first we have to understand what a visual motor workspace is. So a visual motor workspace is the space that exists between you and the task that you're trying to perform. So as I'm sat here now, I can see a vase. You can't see it, just there. Mm-hmm. For me to be able to process to go and pick that vase up, I have to take in information such as the stool that's in front of me, how I'm going to walk to it, perceive the weight of the vase. I've got to look at the depth between me and the vase. And then I've got to move towards it into a workspace. And then, my motor movement will pick it up and I will have achieved the task. So I perceive it, I know the movement that needs to be done to pick it up, my brain processes that information, and I then walk into the visual motor workspace, pick it up, and I move into that task and achieve that. In snooker, that's the same, but you're not processing a single visual motor space. So in golf, you're processing one. You're processing the line between the ball and the hole. In cricket, although the ball's moving, you're only looking at one visual motor space. You're looking at the space of the ball, the angle that it's coming at you. In snooker, what my study shows is there's 5 visual motor spaces specifically that we can look at. There's the space between the human and the cue ball. So the space that exists between you and the cue ball, the space that exists between the cue ball and the object ball, the space that exists between the object ball and the pocket. So they're the main 3 because that's how you judge the line of aim, where to put your cue tip and what you're delivering the cue on. They're the 3 main pieces of information. And then there's 2 additional things. One is the rest of the table. So usually if you're focusing about cue ball control, someone, if they're cueing and they'd have the glasses on, they'll look at that line that I've just said first, and then they usually look to where they want the cue ball to go. And you'll see it loads. Like as a commentator, you'll know they'll look and then you'll see their head, they'll go like that. And what they're doing is they're looking at where they want to put the cue ball. And then the 5th thing is abstract objects that can get involved. The cushions, the object balls, things outside of the table, other things that are kind of, they're relevant, but they're not as relevant. So the study that I work on focuses on the main 3. Now, if you was going from just human to the cue ball, the original plan that you just said would be perfect. And when I explain my PhD, the 5 stages of every snooker shot to you in a minute, you will understand why what you've just said is massively important and will work for 95% of people. Because it's about putting yourself on a line of aim, using big body movements, using serial motor movements, lots of muscle movement, getting into position, and walking towards that line of aim. And most people, presuming that they assess the situation correctly before getting down to the shot, will be able to trust that movement, and then all they've got to do is deliver the cue on the line, which is the easy bit, arguably, what we see. But there's the question of what if you don't perceive the workspace between the object ball, cue ball, and pocket correctly, then the line that you're putting the cue on is not going to be the line of aim that is required for you to be able to play the shot. So we see in pool snooker, there's a lot of sighting tools. Some I believe in, some I don't believe in. I'm not going to criticize anyone's products. But there's a lot of sighting, and the sighting only ever takes into consideration the workspace that's between the human and the object and the cue ball. And that's because arguably it's the most important workspace to process.
Say that last thing once again, what you just said about the approaching the cue ball.
So the space that exists between the human and the cue ball, how you place your cue on that line, is arguably the most important workspace to process, to pay attention to when playing snooker, when playing pool, when playing Chinese 8-ball, when playing cue sports. Generally. Now, you have to be able to process the other information. And I think 80% of the work is done in that workspace. And arguably, I think this because my entire PhD is only focused on that workspace. We ignored everything else because we thought, okay, we'll just focus on this first and then we'll look at the other stages, which I'll explain the other stages probably in the next video because I realize time's running out here at the top. So a lot of the cueing aids, a lot of the training only focus on that area. What I would argue is you need more than that. I would argue you have to be able to have some form of understanding of the line between the pocket and the ball, on the object ball, and the object ball and the cue ball. And in fact, I've never heard him say this, but a lot of people when I was growing up in the club used to tell me that Henry used to look at the pocket before he would look at the line of aim, like he'd go from the pocket to the ball to the wide.
Not
wide
true. Not true.
Not true.
Well,
no.
Yes, kind of. I heard he would choose his line. He would get down on the line. He would then check cue ball, object ball. He would then check He would then look at the pocket.
Yeah,
Then he would look back to the cue ball or object ball, whichever was his final point
yeah, yeah.
to look at. But yes, he did flick his eyes in that routine, and he's the only one I know to have done it where he does at some point
Mm.
look at the pocket, which is
It
would
makes a lot
throw
of
me
sense then,
off.
doesn't it? That he's processing the workspace that's going from the cue ball, the object ball to the pocket. So he's kind of looking at the pocket to see that. So like in terms of the way that he's processing the visual information, that makes tons of sense. He's the only person I've ever known to do it down on a shot. And it'd be interesting to have a conversation with him to know what he was actually looking at or whether it was just a habit. Um, but yeah, so I feel like 80% of the shot is done between the human and the object ball. Sorry, the cue ball. But there's still these other workspaces that we've got to process. Um, and there's also that argument of can the player place the cue on the correct line between the human and the cue ball? And if they can do that consistently, then most of the time they're going to be on the line of aim that they've picked, and then you've just got to focus on cueing is the theory. But of course, I've not done the study yet. I've only done samples, so who knows if that's what it will show. We can hypothesize that that's what it will show. But you know, this is the beautiful thing about being a sports scientist. Sometimes you get proven wrong, or you never get proven wrong, but you get proven different. And it's exciting because then you can just go and explore that. It's like, oh, I've got something to work with. I can go and explore that. So yeah, in this first half of the video, I've really tried to hone in on a lot of the theory. Um, in the second half of the video, I'm going to make it more Q Sport specific and talk about the PhD specifically and in areas of the PhD in detail to ensure that people get a Q Sports understanding. But I think it's really important that you understand the theories that underpin what I'm talking about, and I've tried to
Absolutely,
explain it in simplest terms. And I
absolutely,
hope I've done that.
absolutely fascinating stuff. We're going to come back in part two, and we're going to be talking more in depth. And I really want to get down. There's a few questions I've got for you as well. I really want to know.
That's great.
Yeah, there's so much I'm interested, especially playing with earphones. I've got an interesting, I heard an interesting little theory on that. I want to get your opinion on that and so much more. So we're going to be back with Zakery Lamb in part two. Zach, don't go anywhere. We'll be
You're in
back
part
soon.
two. Yeah.